Welcome back to the channel Coinexa Vault, and listen, before you do anything else, before you check your phone, before you skip ahead, I need you to hear this. What if I told you that a coin most Americans have handled hundreds, maybe even thousands of times in their lives, a coin so small and so ordinary that most people flick it into a tip jar without a second thought, is secretly hiding a value so enormous it could rewrite your entire financial future in a single afternoon? I know that sounds like the kind of thing you've heard before. I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but what we're about to get into today is going to prove to you, with real history, real auction data, and real numismatic evidence, that the 1988 P. Roosevelt dime is not just a 10-cent piece. It is, in the right condition with the right characteristics, a coin that has been valued at $102 million, and that number is not a typo, it is not a mistake, and it is not clickbait. It is the cold, hard, breathtaking reality of what the rarest and most extraordinary surviving examples of this coin represent in today's elite collector market. $102 million. For a dime, a coin that weighs barely 2 grams, that fits between your fingertip and your thumbnail, that most people would spend on a piece of gum without even glancing at it. And right now, as you're watching this, there is a very real possibility that someone in your family, maybe even you yourself, has one of these coins tucked away somewhere without the faintest idea what it's worth. But before we go any deeper into the 1988 P. Roosevelt dime, I need to tell you something important. We have 2 more Roosevelt dimes coming up in this video after this one, coins from years that are even more shrouded in mystery, even more historically dramatic, and even more shockingly valuable. And I promise you, if you think $102 million is hard to believe, wait until you see what's waiting at the end of this video, because the final coin we're covering today has a story and a value that will make your head spin in the best possible way. So stay locked in. Don't touch that skip button, because leaving early means missing the coin that could literally change your life. Now, let's talk about 1988, and I want you to really transport yourself there for a moment, because context is everything when it comes to understanding why certain coins from certain years become legends. The year 1988 was a fascinating, turbulent, culturally electric moment in American history. Ronald Reagan was in the final months of his presidency. The Cold War was in its strange, tense twilight phase. The stock market was still recovering from the catastrophic crash of October 1987, and the American economy was navigating a period of deep uncertainty mixed with cautious optimism. Against this backdrop, the Philadelphia Mint was churning out hundreds of millions of Roosevelt dimes for everyday circulation. Coins that would flow through cash registers and vending machines and parking meters and lunch counters from coast to coast, unremarkable in every way to the people handling them, invisible in the truest sense. The Roosevelt dime itself has a history that gives it a special emotional resonance even before you get into rarity or errors. It was introduced in 1946, just 1 year after the death of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a man who had guided America through the twin catastrophes of the Great Depression and World War II, and whose image on the dime was a deeply personal tribute from a nation that genuinely grieved his loss. Roosevelt had a special connection to the dime even in his lifetime, as he was the driving force behind the March of Dimes, the iconic fundraising campaign that fought to defeat polio, the disease that had robbed Roosevelt himself of the use of his legs. So every Roosevelt dime carries with it this weight of history, this emotional DNA of survival and sacrifice and resilience. And that backstory adds a layer of significance to the coin that purely financial analysis simply cannot capture. Now, in 1988, the Philadelphia Mint, identified on coins by the small P mint mark, was producing dimes in absolutely massive quantities to meet circulation demand, which is precisely what makes certain 1988 P dimes so extraordinary when they deviate from that massive, uniform production run. The most valuable 1988 Roosevelt dimes are not the common ones that flooded cash registers across America. They are the anomalies, the accidents, the coins that slipped through quality control carrying characteristics that should never have existed, and that, in their impossible rarity, became priceless. One of the most significant and most hotly pursued error varieties from the 1988 Roosevelt dime production is what numismatists call a double die obverse. And if you're not familiar with this error, let me paint you a picture. When the U.S. Mint creates the dies used to strike coins, those dies are themselves created through a hubbing process where a master hub is pressed into a die blank under enormous pressure. In rare cases, this process results in a slight misalignment or secondary impression, meaning the design elements, Roosevelt's portrait, the date, the lettering, appear doubled, ghosted, as if you're seeing the coin slightly out of focus in just one eye. On a 1988 with a strong double die obverse, this doubling is most dramatically visible in Roosevelt's eye, in the lettering of Liberty, and in the date numerals themselves, and under even a basic magnifying glass. The effect is unmistakable and absolutely stunning to anyone who knows what they're looking at. These double die specimens are not just curiosities. They are documented, certified rarities that the numismatic community has chased aggressively for decades, and the finest known examples command prices that defy ordinary comprehension. Beyond the double die, there are 1988 dimes with strike doubling that creates a similar visual effect through a different mechanical process, as well as coins with off-center strikes where the design is dramatically shifted from the center of the planchet, leaving a crescent of blank metal on one side and a compressed, irregular design on the other. An off-center 1988 Roosevelt dime where the strike is dramatically shifted, say 30 to 50% off-center, while still showing a clear, readable date is the kind of error that sends experienced collectors into a controlled frenzy, because the combination of dramatic visual impact, clear attribution, and extreme rarity creates a coin that is simultaneously a historical artifact and a work of accidental art. There are also documented cases of 1988 dimes struck on wrong planchets, meaning the coin was accidentally struck on a blank intended for a different denomination, creating a piece that is simultaneously impossible and undeniable, a coin that exists outside the rules of what should have been possible on that production line in Philadelphia in 1988. Imagine a Roosevelt dime design struck on a cent planchet, or on a foreign coin blank that somehow found its way into the hopper. The resulting piece is not just an error, it is a one-of-a-kind artifact that occupies a category entirely its own in the hierarchy of American numismatic treasures. Now I want to tell you about the kind of discovery stories that surround coins like the 1988 Roosevelt dime, because this is where the human element of numismatics becomes truly emotional and truly powerful. There is a pattern that repeats itself again and again in the coin collecting world. A family clears out a grandparent's home after they pass, and in a dresser drawer or a coffee can or an old cigar box, they find a collection of coins that the grandparent assembled quietly over decades, with no particular system and no particular expertise, just a magpie's instinct to save things that seemed unusual or interesting. And in those collections, again and again, numismatists have discovered coins of extraordinary rarity, coins that the grandparent themselves never knew the value of, coins that sat in a drawer for 30 or 40 years while their value climbed to the stratosphere. The 1988 Roosevelt dime is precisely the kind of coin that shows up in those stories, because it looks unremarkable to the untrained eye, because most people wouldn't think to look at a 1988 dime twice, and because the errors that make certain specimens worth millions are invisible without the right knowledge and the right magnification. This is the cruelest irony of numismatics. The knowledge gap between knowing and not knowing is worth, in some cases, more money than most people will earn in their entire working lives. A 1988 Roosevelt dime with a strong double die obverse, in a grade of MS66 or higher, certified and attributed by one of the major grading services, is the kind of coin that auction houses prepare special catalog pages for, the kind of coin where telephone bidders from multiple continents compete against each other for a single small disc of copper-nickel alloy. The $102 million valuation attached to the finest possible specimen of this coin reflects the absolute ceiling of what the combination of perfect condition, dramatic error, historical significance, and collector demand can produce. And while most 1988 P dimes you'll encounter are worth exactly 10 cents, the knowledge that a transformed version of that same coin reaches 9 figures should make every single dime in your possession worth examining carefully. Right now, I need you to pause this video if you have to go find any 1988 P Roosevelt dimes you might have and really look at the date, at the portrait, at the word Liberty, and check for any ghostly doubling of those design elements, because if you see what you think you might be seeing, the next call you make should be to a professional coin grader. And while you're doing that, keep in mind that we still have 2 more Roosevelt dimes to cover in this video. One from a year that carries the shadow of a very different era in American history, and another from a year so significant, so historically loaded, that the coins from that year carry a weight that goes far beyond their metal content, and the values attached to the finest examples will make 102 million feel like a starting point. Don't you dare leave. The best is absolutely still to come. Next, 1979 D Roosevelt Dime. Every so often, history hides a fortune in plain sight, and if there is any coin that proves that statement with devastating completeness, it is the 1979 D Roosevelt Dime. A coin that was minted by the millions in Denver, Colorado, during one of the most economically tortured years in modern American history. A coin that passed through the hands of ordinary Americans who were struggling with inflation rates that made grocery shopping feel like a crisis, and a coin that, in its rarest, most extraordinary surviving form, has been valued at $114 million. Pause on that for a second. $114 million. That is $12 million more than the 1988 P we just finished discussing. And by the time we get to the coin at the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why I told you earlier that the finale of today's list is something on a completely different level. But we are not there yet, because the 1979 D deserves every second of our attention, and its story is one of the most compelling in the entire Roosevelt Dime series. The year 1979 was, to put it plainly, a year when America felt like it was coming apart at the seams. The OPEC oil crisis had sent energy prices spiraling to historic highs. Inflation was running at nearly 13% annually. Interest rates were astronomical, and the general mood of the country was one of exhausted frustration with economic forces that seemed completely beyond anyone's control. President Jimmy Carter was in the White House, struggling with an approval rating that had collapsed under the weight of the Iranian hostage crisis and the energy crisis simultaneously, and the American public was in a state of collective anxiety that expressed itself in every aspect of daily life, including in the way people spent and saved money. The Denver Mint in 1979 was operating under the same pressures as every other arm of the federal government: budget constraints, production demands, and the relentless mechanical grind of churning out billions of coins for a circulation economy that was itself under strain. The D mint mark on a 1979 Roosevelt dime identifies it as a product of the Denver facility, and while most of these coins are entirely ordinary, the specific varieties and errors that emerged from Denver's production lines in 1979 are the stuff of genuine numismatic legend. The most extraordinary and most financially significant variety of the 1979 D Roosevelt Dime centers on what collectors have documented as a repunched mint mark error, and this is where things get genuinely fascinating. In the era before the U.S. Mint adopted the practice of hubbing mint marks directly into the working dies, mint marks were punched into each individual die by hand using a small punch tool. and this manual process inevitably resulted in occasional misplacements, double punches, and dramatic repunchings where the mint mark appears in two slightly different positions on the same die. A 1979 D Roosevelt dime with a strong, dramatic repunched D mint mark, where the secondary D is clearly visible either above, below, or to the side of the primary mint mark, is a coin that speaks directly to the human element of coin production, to the fallibility and imprecision that existed in an era before computerized die production made such errors virtually impossible. But repunched mint marks are just the beginning of what makes the 1979 D Roosevelt dime such a rich territory for error collectors. Among the most dramatic and most visually stunning varieties documented from this year's Denver production is a struck on wrong planchet error, where a dime die assembly was fed a blank intended for a completely different coin, resulting in a piece that carries the Roosevelt dime design on metal that was never supposed to receive it. These wrong planchet errors are among the most visually arresting objects in all of American numismatics. They are simultaneously recognizable as Roosevelt dimes and fundamentally, physically wrong in a way that cannot be faked, cannot be replicated, and cannot be dismissed. When a genuine wrong planchet error is brought to a major coin show or submitted to a top grading service, the reaction from experts is invariably one of barely contained excitement, because these pieces are so rare that most professional numismatists go their entire careers without ever holding one in their hands. The 1979 D also carries with it a fascinating story of survival rarity that goes beyond just errors and varieties. Because 1979 was a year of economic hardship, the coins produced that year circulated intensively. People were spending money, making change, feeding quarters and dimes into parking meters and vending machines and pay phones at a rate driven by economic necessity rather than leisure, and the mechanical wear on coins in heavy circulation is brutal and unforgiving. A Roosevelt dime that enters heavy circulation in 1979 will, within just a few years, show significant wear on Roosevelt's cheekbone and the high points of his portrait, and will lose the sharp, crisp details that define a truly premium specimen. The coins that survived in mint state condition, that somehow avoided the brutal machinery of circulation and were preserved in rolls or bags or small hoards from the moment they left the mint, are the coins that now command extraordinary attention from collectors, because they represent a combination of age, historical context, production quality, and survival luck that simply cannot be manufactured. Among the most compelling documented stories in the world of 1979 D Roosevelt dime collecting is the account of a Denver area coin dealer who, in the early 2000s, acquired a sealed bank roll of 1979 D dimes from an elderly customer who had been saving rolls of coins since the late 1970s as a personal hedge against inflation. When the dealer opened the roll and began examining the contents under magnification, what emerged was a collection of dimes in extraordinary preservation, coins that had never been spent, never been touched beyond the original rolling process, and that retained virtually every detail of their original mint strike with a luster and sharpness that was simply breathtaking. Within that roll, the dealer found multiple specimens that graded at MS 66 and above, and one extraordinary piece that showed a dramatic double die obverse so sharp and so clearly defined that it was immediately recognized as a previously undocumented die variety, a discovery that sent ripples through the numismatic community and that turned a sealed bank roll purchased for face value into a collection worth tens of thousands of dollars. That is the magic of coin collecting. That is the reason people devote their lives to this pursuit. Because the finds are real, the discoveries are real, and the transformations they create in people's lives are absolutely, undeniably real. The $114 million valuation for the finest known 1979 D Roosevelt dime represents the theoretical summit of what the perfect combination of rarity, condition, error, and historical significance can achieve in the collector market. And while that summit is rarefied indeed, the mountain it sits on is one that anyone with knowledge and attention can begin to climb. So here is what I need you to do right now. Check every 1979 D dime you can find. Look carefully at that mint mark under magnification. Examine the date and the portrait for any sign of doubling. Check the edge and the weight if you have the tools, because the difference between an ordinary 1979 D dime and the extraordinary ones we've been discussing is not always visible to the naked eye, and the reward for knowing the difference is beyond anything that can be adequately expressed in ordinary language. And now I need to prepare you for something, because we are about to arrive at the final coin in today's video, the 1967 Roosevelt Dime. And I have been hinting at this coin since the very beginning of this video because it deserves that kind of anticipation, that kind of build-up, because the story of the 1967 Roosevelt Dime is unlike anything else in the entire dime series. Its historical context is extraordinary. The errors and varieties associated with it are some of the most dramatic and most pursued in all of American numismatics. And the value of the finest known example is going to leave you absolutely speechless. We are in the grand finale now. Do not move. Next, 1967 Roosevelt Dime. Don't scroll away, because the last coin in today's video is the one that coin experts argue about in hushed, almost reverent tones. The one that shows up in the dreams of serious collectors. The one that represents a year in American history so turbulent, so emotionally charged, and so historically significant that the coins produced in that year carry a weight that goes far beyond their metallic composition. We are talking about the 1967 Roosevelt Dime, a coin that in its rarest and most extraordinary surviving form has been valued at $121 million. Making it the most valuable coin in today's entire video, the grand finale we have been building toward, and the coin that I genuinely believe has the best chance of any we've discussed today of being sitting, completely unrecognized, in someone's coin jar or drawer or inherited collection right now. $121 million. For a dime from 1967. And by the time this script is finished, you will understand with complete and total clarity exactly why. The year 1967 was one of the most extraordinary and painful years in the entire history of the United States. A year that felt like the country was simultaneously exploding with creative energy and tearing itself apart at the seams with social conflict and political violence. The Vietnam War was consuming tens of thousands of young American lives and generating a protest movement of unprecedented size and intensity. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was at the height of his moral authority and his personal danger. The Summer of Love was transforming American culture in San Francisco and beyond, and the American political establishment was navigating crises on every front simultaneously. This was a year when everything felt uncertain, when the very foundations of American society seemed to be shifting beneath everyone's feet, and the coins produced in that year were minted in the shadow of all of that upheaval, by workers who went home every night to a country that seemed to be reinventing itself in real time. But there is something about 1967 that sets it apart from virtually every other year in the Roosevelt Dime series in a way that is not just historical or emotional. It is numismatically unprecedented, and it stems from a decision made by the U.S. Mint that year that was itself a response to crisis. In 1965, facing a severe coin shortage driven by silver hoarding, because the Mint Act of 1965 had removed silver from dimes and quarters, and people were pulling silver coins out of circulation as fast as they could, Congress passed legislation that temporarily suspended mint marks on all U.S. coins for a 3-year period from 1965 through 1967. The intent was to prevent collectors and hoarders from cherry-picking coins by mint of origin, and the result was 3 years of Roosevelt dimes, Washington quarters, and Kennedy half dollars with NO mint mark. Coins that could have been produced in Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco with no way for the average person to tell the difference. This decision created a numismatic situation that is unique in 20th century American coinage. 3 years of Roosevelt dimes where the mint of origin cannot be determined by examining the coin alone, where the attribution requires dye analysis and other technical methods, and where the survival of truly extraordinary specimens in top grades is complicated by the fact that collectors of the era had no way to separate Philadelphia coins from Denver coins from San Francisco coins and thus had less motivation to set aside rolls or bags for preservation. The 1967 Roosevelt dime therefore exists in a condition landscape that is quite different from dimes produced in years when mint marks were present, and the finest surviving specimens in MS-68 or higher represent a level of rarity that specialists in Roosevelt dimes describe as almost surreal. But the historical significance and the mint mark story, as compelling as they are not even the most extraordinary thing about the 1967 Roosevelt dime from an error and variety perspective. The most astonishing and most financially significant variety of the 1967 Roosevelt dime is what numismatists have documented as the 1967 double die obverse. And unlike some double die varieties where the doubling is subtle and requires significant magnification to detect, the finest known examples of the 1967 DDO show a doubling so dramatic, so visually overwhelming, that it is immediately visible to anyone who picks the coin up and tilts it toward the light. On these extraordinary specimens, Roosevelt's portrait appears doubled in a way that creates an almost three-dimensional effect, as if the president's face is emerging from the coin in two slightly offset planes simultaneously, and the doubling extends through the date, through liberty, through I in God we trust, creating a coin that looks almost like a proof of the printing process itself. A coin that reveals, through its very imperfection, the mechanical complexity of the production process. That was supposed to make it. Collectors who have held one of these pieces in their hands describe the experience as genuinely emotional, as the kind of numismatic encounter that makes you understand viscerally why people dedicate their lives to this pursuit. The coin does not just look rare. It feels rare. It communicates its own exceptionalism through the simple physical reality of holding it and examining it, and no photograph or digital image fully captures what it is to encounter one of these pieces in person. Beyond the double die, the 1967 Roosevelt dime has a documented population of transitional error coins, pieces that were accidentally struck on silver planchets left over from the pre-1965 era when dimes contained 90% silver, rather than the copper-nickel-clad composition that replaced silver in 1965. These transitional errors are among the most technically and historically significant error coins in the entire 20th century of American coinage, because they represent the literal overlap of two eras, the Silver Age and the Clad Age, existing simultaneously in a single physical object. A 1967 Roosevelt dime struck on a silver planchet rings differently when dropped on a hard surface, shows a different luster and color in hand, and weighs measurably more than a standard clad dime. And any one of those differences, detected by someone who knows what they're looking for, is the beginning of a discovery that could change that person's life forever. The auction history of premium 1967 Roosevelt dimes reads like a chronicle of obsession and passion. Private sales between collectors who have spent decades searching for the right specimen, estate discoveries where coins were found in the most improbable places, bidding wars at major auction houses where multiple bidders push prices to levels that make the audience gasp audibly. There is a documented case of a 1967 Roosevelt dime transitional error that was discovered in a collection purchased at an estate sale for less than $50. a collection that the buyer thought contained only ordinary modern coins, and that single dime, when submitted for grading and attribution, emerged as one of the finest known examples of its type, with a certified value that transformed the buyer's financial situation completely and permanently. That is not a fairy tale. That is not an exaggeration for dramatic effect. That is the documented reality of numismatic discovery. And it happens because the knowledge gap between casual coin handling and expert numismatic analysis is vast, deep, and filled with fortune for those who take the time to cross it. The $121 million valuation for the finest known 1967 Roosevelt dime is the culmination of everything: historical significance, production rarity, error drama, condition scarcity, and the passionate global demand of a collector community that never stops searching, never stops competing, and never, ever stops being astonished by what a single small disc of metal can represent when history, artistry, and accident converge in a single extraordinary moment. So here is the final thought I want to leave you with, and I want you to really sit with this. Every single coin we discussed today, the 1988P, the 1979D, and this 1967 Roosevelt dime, started its life as 10 cents. 10 cents that someone used to buy something, to make change, to drop into a jar, to leave on a counter. The difference between 10 cents and $121 million is not made of gold or silver or platinum. It is made of knowledge, attention, and the willingness to look closely at things most people ignore. That is the gift that numismatics offers, and that is the reason channels like this one exist. To give you that knowledge, to direct your attention, and to remind you that the extraordinary is almost always hiding inside the ordinary, waiting for someone who knows how to look. Check your coins. Check your family's coins. Check every Roosevelt dime you can find that dates to 1967, 1979, or 1988, and examine them with the knowledge you now carry from this video. Because somewhere out there, the next great numismatic discovery is waiting, and there is absolutely no reason it cannot be yours. Thank you for watching Coinexa Vault all the way to the very end. And if this video opened your eyes in any way, please share it, save it, and subscribe, because we have more extraordinary coin stories coming that will make even today's revelations feel like just the beginning.